Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and welcome to the April 22nd edition of Horses to Watch. On the show this week, we're going to take a look back at 3 replays from last weekend, 1 from Oaklawn Park on Saturday and 2 from Gulfstream Park on Sunday. Let's start down in Arkansas with that replay from Oaklawn Park. This was a race that took place on that Apple Blossom undercard. It was actually the start of that late pick 5 sequence, the 7th race, an allowance event, going a mile with that short run into the wire. Let's break it from the gate, and I want to focus on the number 3 horse, Locally Owned. This was a horse who was stretching out for the first time since his 2-year-old season, so you'd expect him to show speed, but watch right here as they get pretty crowded heading past the wire the first time, and Joel Rosario, his rider, just has to really slam on the brakes because there was nowhere to go. Horses from the outside came in, horses from the inside came out, and he just took the worst of that trouble, and a horse that you might have expected to be up close to the pace ended up getting shuffled all the way back to last place in the early going. That's just not where you wanted to be, especially when you look at what's happening on the front end in this race. The number 7, Ever Fast, who's nearly going to win this race, he's a horse that's usually coming from well back in the pack, and just because they're not going that fast up front, his rider is able to choose a position up close to the pace here, and the other horse that was projected to be up close and arguably setting the pace was the number 5, Desmond. For whatever reason, he ducked in a bit at the start. His rider wasn't super aggressive, so he wasn't forcing the pace. He was actually in behind the leaders here, and all of that just creates a situation where they're not going that fast up front, and it's going to hinder the horses that are trying to come from the back of the pack, like the number 3, Locally Owned, who, as I said, is out of position to begin with. He's still all the way back in last here. Joel Rosario is now in behind a bunch of horses that are going nowhere. He's trying to ask him a little bit, but there's just not really a path for this horse to run until they get to the top of the stretch. And you're going to see, as they head towards the quarter pole here, when you really start to get into this horse, Locally Owned responds pretty well, and he's going to duck down inside as they get into the stretch here, and he starts to really finish off nicely in this race. He's going to make a good move in the final 3/16 of a mile. The problem is he's just got way too much ground to make up, and they're using that first finish line at Oaklawn Park, so he doesn't even have the whole stretch run to work with. Right here, he's got to alter off the rail because that tire runner inside him drifts back down towards the inside. He gets up for third here, but I don't think there's a whole lot of doubt that this horse would have won the race if he hadn't had that trouble heading into the first turn, had been placed in the early position that you would have expected him to be in, because he finished up so well, and the top 2 really didn't bring their A game to the table. So I think this horse would have won this day. The problem is he was 10-1 in this race off some dirtied up form. Now this is a trip that I think a lot of people saw, so if he shows up in a similar spot next time, we might not get that same price on him. By the same token, though, this is a horse that might be moving in the right direction. He's a lightly raced 4-year-old. I think going longer is really the right move for him, so maybe he's a horse that will have another move forward in him in future starts. Let's now move down to Gulfstream Park and discuss those 2 races from their Sunday card. They're actually both turf races going a mile. We'll begin with the 5th race on the card. It's a maiden special weight for the fillies and mares. We'll break them from the gate. I want to focus on the horse breaking all the way on the outside. It's the number 12, Talking Book. This is a second-time starter for Shug McGahee. Dylan Davis is the rider, and you're going to see right out of the start, she breaks okay, but the runner right inside of her breaks outward a little bit, and it seems like this filly was just still pretty green. Even though she had 1 start under her belt already, she overreacted to that trouble. And then heading into the first turn here, you see Dylan Davis tries to get her down inside, but she's throwing her head around, not really comfortable reining in behind horses. As this race progresses and you see this horse come back into the screen for the second half of the race, you're going to notice that she's a filly that just doesn't have everything all figured out yet. And she doesn't really do any running when she's in behind horses. She only starts to respond to her rider's encouragement when he gets her out into the clear. And take note of that when they get into the stretch of this race. But this is a filly that I think does have some potential because she's got a nice pedigree. Her dam was a decent runner. She's produced a couple of turf horses that have been okay. Crossword and Texting are some multiple turf winners in the family. She's a daughter of Honor Code, and we haven't seen that many Honor Codes on the turf so far. He hasn't had a whole lot of success with them, but this filly certainly seems to be taken to the turf. The other thing to note is this race is being led right now by a 50-1 shot Winnipeg Wonder, and she's nearly going to go gate to wire in this race. So that just kind of speaks to the fact that this wasn't a race that really benefited horses coming from the back of the pack. And you see that the number 12 Talking Book, who's now on the right of the screen here towards the inside, Dylan Davis is really encouraging her. And as I said, she's not responding when she's in behind horses, but watch what happens when he finally gets her out into the clear on the outside of everybody in the stretch. Not yet, because he's still trying to ride her inside of horses here, but now he's going to alter course all the way to the outside, and she just finds another gear and really kicks on for home impressively. And believe it or not, she's nearly going to win this race. She just loses to the number 2 by a nose in the end because she really responds to that encouragement when there's daylight in front of her. her. Just seems like a filly that needs to figure some things out, but there's obviously ability here. She's run in spots in both her races, did a similar performance in her debut, although she wasn't as successful that day. I believe she was sixth first time out, but just seems like one that's slowly putting it all together, and I think we're going to see her break her maiden next time, and after that, remains to be seen how good she ultimately is, but I think this is one that has some untapped potential. Let's finish off with the 8th race on that Sunday card at Gulfstream Park. As I said, this is another one going a mile, and this race features a trip that I think a lot of people saw by the winner of this race, and I'll talk about him a little bit, but I want to focus on one of the also-rans. Let's break it from the gate, and the winner of the race is going to be the number 11 Street Ready, but I want to focus also on the number 9, Please Call Me Back, and as they head past the wire the first time, take note of what happens when all of these horses just line up across the track heading into that first turn. Nobody really wants to give an inch, and you see Amicio Jaramillo on the 9 is riding the horse to try to maintain that position, but he's one of the ones that takes the worst of it because he gets shuffled back and then just bounced around between horses for about a 16th of a mile. That's a really scary, uncomfortable position for a rider and horse to be in. When you're in tight quarters like that, the horse wants to go forward, but there's nowhere to go because you're running up on heels ahead of you. And not only does this horse get an uncomfortable trip in the fact that he's in traffic, but he's also wide around that first turn, and he's going to end up going wide around the second turn as well. Now, people are going to note that the winner of this race, the number 11 Street Ready, who was widest of all around that first turn, he is a horse that covered more ground than anybody. If you look at the Trackist figures for this race, Street Ready, the number 11, covered 114 more feet than the horse that covered the least ground in this race. So that's pretty significant. Usually you only see numbers like that when horses bolt on a turn. But the number 9, Please Call Me Back, he covered 100 more feet, just 14 less than Street Ready, than the horse that covered the least distance. So he's also covering way more ground than anybody else. And as they round the far turn here, you see that horse in the green silks, Please Call Me Back. He's trying to make a run around everybody. Amicio Jaramillo, who's on him, is trying to move at this point in the race, which is really earlier than you want him to be starting to run on a closer, but he's got to do it to try to get some position for the stretch drive. All things considered, this horse, he tires late in the game, but he really had a right to because he had all that trouble into the first turn. He was so wide around the second turn. I just think that he deserves a pass for this race because he's a horse that hasn't really shown his best yet as a 3-year-old, but he did show some potential as a 2-year-old. He was stakes placed in a couple of turf races, I think up at Woodbine. He was in over his head in the Cutler Bay in his 2020 debut, and then this race happened where the trip was just all wrong. I still think Please Call Me Back has some potential for Roger Attfield. If he's back in a similar spot next time in a race with a bit of pace in it, I think he'll be far more successful. So those are all the replays for this week. Hopefully we can make a score with one of these horses in the upcoming weeks when these horses run back. So thanks for watching this week. I'll be back again next week with 3 more horses to watch.